This is Darren Pulsford, Chief Solution Architect, author, and most importantly, your host.
And welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology.
On today's episode, Data Integrity Driving Zero Trust with special guest Walter Hancock, CTO of Walacor. Walter, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I got, I don't want to say jumped, but pretty close by your CEO at Intel's Public Sector Summit. And she had 30 seconds and she sold the whole company in 30 seconds on what you guys do. So I was like, I got to have these guys come on the podcast because this is really interesting information, really interesting approach, a problem that we kind of knew about. We've danced around for a long time. But before we dive into any of that, Walter, tell my audience a little bit about you and your journey, how you've gotten here. I know they're very interested in hearing who my guests are and how they got to where they're at.
So I'm a technology person, been for a long time, kind of an evangelist, definitely an architect. I mean, I wrote my first Hello World program in 1984. I'm ashamed to say a little bit.
You and I are right there together.
Yeah, that's been a long time for sure. But, you know, the thing I really liked about development and technology in general, especially back then, it was kind of like the Wild West, right? And you were trying to solve problems all of the time. And pretty soon I got to the point where I understood that it wasn't just solving problems. It wasn't just implementing technology. It was adding value, right? It was making companies, making people work better by leveraging technology. And obviously, as the decades, it's terrible, have gone by, right?
We're in a new millennium too, Walter,
I know,
just to let you know.
I know, right? So, you know, the idea of technology adding value has panned out very well, right? I mean, we see that constantly, and especially, you know, I like to see the emerging stuff, zero trust being one of them, right? Is, you know, what is that going to add? But, you know, my career path has always been about helping companies. I implemented manufacturing systems when I was younger. I did a lot of CRM. I did a lot of financial systems. I started my own consulting firms and did a lot of stuff that I wanted to do with those. And, you know, was part of some startups, some .coms, some good ones, some bad ones, and, you know, learned a lot. But what my claim to fame has always been as my career developed is to take technology and put it together in a unique way to solve problems. And that's really what Walacor is about as well. And that's why we're passionate about it, why the CEO is passionate about it, because we believe what we have really kind of hits home with a lot of different use cases.
Well, I like your intro of yourself because it's like me. I always say, hey, I bring technology and people together to help solve problems, right? And it sounds like you've done the same thing. You know, a fellow traveler, you know, software engineer by passion, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we think software can solve all the world's problems if people would just listen to the software engineers.
Yeah, but you know, the one crux of that always comes back to, you know, the can people understand what the problem is, what you're trying to solve, in order to translate it into technology, and that is the hard part, without a doubt, right?
I totally agree. So let's talk about the problem space that you guys are going after. It's a problem space that I don't think everyone truly understands, right? Everyone has this innate trust of, I put my data in an S3 container. I put my data in my data center. It's safe. It's protected. It doesn't change. It's sitting there. That's not true.
No, that is not true. And you know, a couple of examples that we see in the news all the time are all of these cyber things that happen, and people's data gets compromised, and we get these letters that say, hey, your data was compromised, but here you can have this monitoring for 6 months or something like that, right?
Yeah. I was part of that.
Yeah, I've got.
I think everyone in the nation was, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the core example or the thing that I like to talk about is, you know, when you talk about data, a lot of people have that idea, that implicit trust of how we're handling and storing data. And, usually the general public or, a C-level person within an organization has that idea that, yes, my data is good, right? My data is protected. But as you move down the food chain in an organization and you get closer to where the data is actually handled and used and, adds value, you get less and less confidence in the data. And,
So why is it? I would think that the CEO, the C-suite would, they have to make strategic decisions based off of data. And so what you're telling me is that's a false sense of security of their data, or are people further down the chain more, I don't know, cynical about data protection? What's the truth there?
So it's really the mentality that happens when you're in a certain role, and us as the general public, as consumers, that we kind of get into where we don't want to worry about it, right? Where, a C-level person in an organization, it is their job to communicate that everything is good, right? That things are going well, that everything is under control. But, again, as you move down, the evidence that we have is all of these things we're seeing of breaches of people, exfiltrating data and keeping it. And these are not small companies that we're seeing today, right? They used to be kind of small, but hackers have learned that, it's not just the small companies that have these problems. It's everybody. And it's not just companies, it's people as well. And, it really comes down to the idea that what happens is, people tend to do what I call the onion, right? They say, okay, I have this data that I want to keep protected. So what do? So they take it and they start wrapping it in layers, right? So they add encryption maybe,
right? That's the first thing we tell everyone.
Yeah.
Everything should be encrypted at rest.
Right. And the amount of people that do not hit the button to encrypt their data in the world today is astronomical, right?
Yeah,
especially when
crazy.
It's right there to be done, right? And most people do not do it. And it's not just people, it's companies that don't do it as well, right? So then you wrap it again, right? You put some kind of log analysis or change analysis. You start backing it up. You could add some resiliency. You start, doing geographic distribution and all of these kind of things. And the problem with this is that this is not current best practice. It is kinda, right? Because this is what
we've been doing it's what we've been doing for decades, right?
For decades. And needless to say, the environment and everything has changed drastically in those decades, right? The amount of compromises that happen today compared to 20 years ago is unbelievable. And the sophistication, right? And with the advent of AI writing code, right? The availability of that sophistication goes up dramatically. And, one thing that we should talk about here a little bit is these compromises, they're not just hackers, they are internal threats as well, right? And it doesn't necessarily even have to be a malicious threat, right? It'd
be a mistake, right?
Yeah, it could be a mistake, a DBA. I was a DBA in these manufacturing companies, and I would be up at 2:00 in the morning doing some kind of migration, and I would write a query, and I would think to myself, okay, this is 10 seconds. I hit enter. 4 minutes later, it comes back, and I'm thinking to myself, oh man, what just happened? What just happened, right? And the ability to know exactly what happened all of the time, that is the crux of what Walacor has done. So we've taken these best practices, these ideas that everybody is supposed to be using as best practices, and we put them into one. So I'm a simple kind of guy when I talk about technology, and the tagline that I always use is what you put in is exactly what you get out, and we can prove it, right? And that is a very powerful statement when you think about the implications that happen, right? I'm that DBA, I run that query, and it takes longer than I expected to. What just happened?
What just happened? So this reminds me that query thing, right? Because I've done it myself. When I was in college, I was a sysadmin of, I remember the machine name. It was called Spock. It was a Linux mail server. It was the mail server for the whole university. Well, we found that someone was storing, they were storing things they shouldn't have been storing on the mail server. Somehow they got access, and they stored it in a directory which was named backspace. They did a control V backspace as the name of the. So they were chewing up a bunch of file system space. So as an admin, I went in there and I was trying to remove this, but I couldn't remove it. I saw the space there, but I couldn't figure out how to remove it. So I said, well, I know how to do this. I'll do an rm-rf.star. Now, for those people that know Linux and Unix, you'll know that that's the worst thing you can possibly do, especially on those older systems, because it never checked.
That's a big command there, man.
Yeah, it went all the way to root and destroyed the whole file system, the root, everything. So it blew everything away. So we make mistakes. It took me 2 days, and my boss did not fire me. He goes, you'll never do that again, so we were going to keep you around, especially after you rebuild everything from backups. Right? Luckily, backups had just happened, so we didn't lose any data. But I'll tell you what, this happens. Another example of when this happened, Amazon goes down, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 3 years now. They went down during Thanksgiving weekend. Their biggest shopping day of the year, they went down on the East Coast because a sysadmin pushed the wrong file up. Right? Simple, small error. Yeah, so this stuff happens inadvertently. Yeah. It could be malicious or not malicious. So you guys aren't protecting against stupid.
No, what we do is so some of these best practices are things that we automatically integrate, like change management, right? So whenever some of the big keywords that we always use is this 100% audit log. So anything that you put in, we track, right? So any change that's made is immutable so that we know exactly what changed when. So if there's ever a question about where did it come from or what happened at that particular time, we include all of that information by default, automatically turned on. You don't have to do anything about it. So right?
Auditability on all the data that's under Walacor. So auditability, great. You need that for a lot of compliance as well.
Well, and just this idea, right? I mean, a lot of companies that we talk to, there's two things that people always use an objection against us, right? One is that they already have all of this, right? And, when I start asking them, well, how many people does it take? And how many pieces of software does it take? And how much surface area are you exposing? And how much, and all this kind of stuff, they don't really want to talk to us anymore. Right. And then
well, that's a good point. I want to tease out. The best practice is, I have a piece of software that monitors my file system and logs everything that's going on. Right. So people are doing this, but it's not a holistic system.
Yeah, it's not integrated.
It's adding on to a traditional file storage.
And those are valid, right? I mean, our deliverable and the value that we add is based on those best practices, right? Our contention is that we do it, like you said, and I like that word, holistically and built in, and most importantly, always on. Right? Like we do encryption we use a unique derived key. Here's my marketing spiel. Unique derived key for each item that you put in. So not only do we do encryption, right, at that lowest level, but we also take it another step further and we use these derived keys. So, that's kind of
if someone gets a key.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
They only get one piece of data. They don't get
and
the
the
whole
data
kingdom.
that they get, and let's say they do brute force that one piece and then they brute force another piece, they don't really know if they're related at all, right? Because, a normal database may do, let's be very small, let's say 10 things per second it does, right? And,
Right.
over a month, that's a lot of stuff. So if they decrypt 2 of those things, what are they really going to get out of it, right? What kind of stuff are they going to get?
Where traditionally today, I will put a encryption key on a file system.
And
I get access
potentially
to that encryption key, and I have everything in that directory. I have everything in that file system.
And you may rotate the key, right? Period of
Right.
time or something
Yeah.
like that. But you're not going to do it at that micro level that we do. And again, this is kind of the idea, is that we've taken those best practices. And believe me, I've implemented onions and encryption and everything.
I have to.
Yep. And we take those and we use existing and emerging technology to get a better solution, right? A more secure solution.
So you guys took a different architectural approach. But you took all the best practices, folded it into one architecture instead of it being glommed on. In fact, it reminds me of we're helping a customer right now move from a mainframe COBOL program, one of the oldest applications running on the earth today. And we talked to them about this, and they said, we don't know how to untangle this because we've globbed all this stuff around it that uses it. So how do we undo this? Do we have the same problem with storage today? Because I've got several different, I've got an encryption engine, I've got an audit engine, I've got access and management engines, I've got a validity checking, deduplication, replication, disaster recovery, business continuity schemes.
Yeah, and all of that are layers of the onion, and even with Walacor, you still need some of that, right? But one of the things that's happening today is we do, from an IT perspective, right? We are simplification, because we do include a lot of those capabilities out of the box, and again, they're always turned on. You don't really have to do anything to take advantage of those things. But in general, the idea for us is that individual piece of data needs to be protected at that lowest level. If you talk about access control, let's say, right, we don't really do access control because of 2 things. One is that means that we have to go out into the world, so to speak, or the world is coming into us. And a lot of people already have infrastructure in place to do that access management, right? So the way we handle it is we do integration into RBAC, ABAC, right? Whatever kind of authentication you want to use. And what we try to do is make it easy to adopt us, right? Because the onion approach, especially today, when you're talking about these vulnerabilities and the visibility that data integrity is getting, you really need to protect at that lowest level and be assured, right? We talked about different levels of the organization have different expectations of integrity overall. What we need to really do is get to the point where that is not
everyone
a
has the same assurance.
Yeah, and assurance is a very good word, because when you get data, you have spent a lot of time doing it. Let's talk about a customer transaction, right? The amount of capital and resources that went into getting that transaction is monumental, and to keep it and protect it and to make sure that the integrity is good is just a valid business process, right? When we talk about data today, the number one asset that any company has is data, right? There are companies that are built on just data in general today.
Well, yeah.
So, if you don't protect that.
I have a question around that then.
Yeah, please.
Because when I work with organizations on their data strategies, we talk about prioritization of data and ranking data, right? Some data is more important than other data. We do that so we can either guarantee more assurance, guarantee more security, or talk about data lifecycle management, getting rid of data that doesn't matter when I'm out of resources and things like that. With what you're saying here is I can treat all my data, as far as the assurance goes, I can treat them all the same because the cost it's built in, is what you're saying.
Right. And if you take that, so let's say you are coming from the best practice with the onion and everything, right?
Right.
And you say, and you have to do an analysis like you're talking about because you find that your data is not as secure or it does not have the integrity. So you can't boil the ocean. Right? It's very difficult to boil the ocean. So you have to pick and choose, right? So you have to find those nuggets, the golden copies, if you will, that you want to protect and treat them special, right? And I agree with you. What we do is different. We say everything is important.
Everything is special.
Right? And you need to protect everything because one of the things that data discovery and AI even is kind of helping with is when you start mining this data looking for valuable information, you don't know what's important, right? It's hard for you to know that this piece of information 10 years from now is not going to be as valuable as this other piece of information.
Well, that leads to data hoarding. We've seen this, right?
Yep.
A lot of companies, we can't get rid of any data because it might be useful in the future.
That's right. And
what
I
you're
kind of
saying
agree
is,
with that tactic a little bit, right?
Well,
because,
I do too to some point, but what you're saying is how do you know that data hasn't changed in the last 10 years?
Yeah, and that's really important because a good example is, let's say that you have, let's talk about AI since I brought it up. So you have an input data set, you have a training model, and then you have outputs that come from it. So the question is when you're getting this output that you're potentially basing a decision on, are you assured that the training data that you put in wasn't modified or skewed away from what you originally put it in? Right? And this idea of AI poisoning comes into it.
Yeah, I was going to mention AI poisoning because this is a big problem right now.
It is a really big problem, and it goes back to the crux of what we've been talking about, which is at the lowest level, are you guaranteed that your data is good? And, to know that and to trust these outputs from the AI, you really need to know for sure that what you're putting in is exactly what you think it is, right? Because you have this model, you run it one time, and everybody's paying very close attention to it, right? And then 2 years down the road, you still have this model, it's getting retrained on a regular basis, right? And it gives this output. Are you still gonna rely on that output, right?
Yeah, it reminds me garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out. That's one of my favorites.
The AIs, right? If you train AI on bad data.
Yeah. Or and it's not that
well, this could be very insidious. Think about the hackers here. I only have to change a little bit of data and you don't even know.
You don't even know.
Months, years later, your AI is redirecting.
Yeah.
Maybe redirecting money to my accounts. Maybe it's opening up back doors for me. Who knows, right? I mean, this is very interesting study.
Well,
I guess it's scaring everyone, right? We're scaring everyone now.
Yeah, it isn't, and it is kind of scary, right? I mean, the short answer though is that this is only a problem, or it has really come out to be a problem recently, right? Because the let's call it marginal integrity or not 100% integrity, we've been able to compensate for it pretty easily, right? But now we're becoming more and more data dependent, and the quality and the integrity of that data becomes more critical because we're basing more decisions on it. And it's so much data that a human cannot look at it and be able to verify it without an extreme amount of work in order to go through it, right? Let's talk about zero trust here a little bit, right? Because data integrity for zero trust is really critical, right? So
if I don't have integrity of my data or assurance of my data, and I put zero trust around it, then I'm trusting something that's not trustworthy.
Right. I mean, there's two areas that I like to talk about integrity with zero trust, and one is the MUR, or the master user record, right? If that does not have 100% integrity, you're basing your identity decisions on something that can't be trusted, right? So that is really critical. And that's no different than any of the other pre-zero trust things like LDAP or
right.
confederated authentication or any of that, right? If your user repository is not 100%, you're in trouble, right? And then zero trust brings in another piece to it, which is the end user behavior analysis, right? Whenever somebody gets authenticated in zero trust, it doesn't just do their identity. It says, okay, Darren wants access to this resource. He has requested this particular resource within this time frame before from this IP, and when he typed this password, his cadence was so and so, right?
Right.
So there's a huge amount of information. So what's happening in the background is, as you're doing these things, your past behavior is being stored someplace, right? So think about me as a hacker now. I want to be Darren. Right? Well, I can't be Darren, but if I want to, I can get into the behavior logs and I can modify them
myself,
so I can be Darren, right? And
wait, there was a Mission Impossible that did this. I remember, right? They changed the red. They had to go in and change the record to change some guy's gait because they were using the way the guy walked.
Yeah, and we see it a lot in the movies for sure, right? The guy pokes out his eye and uses a retinal scanner, or cuts off his finger or something like that,
exactly.
Right? I can be Darren, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, you can be me. Yeah, thanks. Cut off my finger. You can be me. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. We talked about the problem space really well. What's unique about, we talked about holistic approach to what you guys have. What is it really? I mean, let's talk about brass tacks. Let's say I've got a whole bunch of data on my own file system and in the cloud. And I'm saying, I'm 100% bought into Walacor. I'm going to move everything to Walacor. What's that look like?
So there's a couple of different ways to do it, right? And, I've been doing software for a long time. So one of the words I like to use when we talk about how you work with Walacor is adoption and agnostic, right? So the adoption is kind of important to us. And there's two things that I can talk about there. One is that we make ourselves look and feel and taste like a database, right? So we have a REST API that follows database standards, which is CRUD, create, read, update, delete, right? So when somebody sits down to write an application against us or to use us as a data store, we go with what they already know, right? It's a little different because we are kind of special, but in general, it's kind of the same methodology that everybody's used to. So the adoption is really not that difficult. Now, the other thing that we are doing is we're making ourselves look and feel and taste like what people are already using. So one of the things that we're coming out with now is S3 compatibility. So S3, for anybody who doesn't know, is this huge object data store, and especially prevalent in AI and things. The fastest growth of data in the world is within this object data store. It's not records in a database, but it's like Excel files and PDF files and all of these. These are objects.
It's like files, what I'm used to using for file system.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, years ago, Amazon with AWS S3 came out with this object store, and they created an API that is now the de facto standard in the world, right? When you talk about object store and integrating with it, almost always you're talking about this S3 API.
Yeah.
Right. So what we've done is we added a component in front of our product that is S3 compatible. So now if you have S3 already in use in your organization, you can drop Walacor into the workflow and there's no changes that you need. It's right out of the box.
That's low. Yeah, that's low friction.
Yeah.
It helps me.
And even by doing that, you get more benefit, right? Like we always talk about that we enhance object storage, right? Because we use that unique key per item encryption. And so you upload 20 files, we're going to use 20 different keys to do it, right? We are immutable and we can track, we know that stuff, right? A lot of object store already says that they're basically read or write only, right? And that's fine, right? But what we can do is we can actually prove it as well. Not only do we make it so you can only write it one time, but you can actually go back and say, is this really true, right? It really, give me the assurance, right?
So that's a good question. Do you guys allow for versioning of files, and can I go back in time?
Yeah. So, the good news, bad news is we definitely do, right? That's the good news.
Right.
The bad news is we tend to keep everything, right? Because in order for us to know if something has changed, we need the old and we need the new, right? And then there's a comparison probably outside of our product that you can do that actually says, okay, here's PDF 1, here's PDF 2. What is the difference between the two of them, right? And so we definitely do versioning. And really, to tell you the truth, it really came from S3, right? Because S3 does versioning. So we did that same stuff, right? And out of the box, we do that.
Very, very cool. So if I have S3, if I'm using S3, easy integration. If I'm using an Oracle database,
yeah, so it's a little harder lift for us, right? And
I'm importing the data into Walacor.
Well, and so importing isn't too bad, right? But adoption is the big thing. And so let's say you have an existing CRM and you're using Oracle as the back end, right?
Okay.
You don't want to rewrite the CRM.
No,
right?
No, that would
You're definitely not, because it's working for you, right?
Yeah.
What you want is the integrity, right? So there are two ways to use Walacor. One is a future and one is today, right? So the first one is side by side. So this is kind of what you were talking about before.
I have a assured data store.
Right. And it may not be the low level data, right? Let's take an ERP system. You're doing financials at the end of the year. You don't necessarily want to keep all of that detail, but you may want to keep what you're publishing to the world, right? So that you have that there protected forever. So that's kind of the side by side golden copy kind of thing.
Got it.
Now, on the roadmap, the idea for Walacor is to be what I'm calling SQL wire compatible, right? So we have this thing, just like we have this S3 API compatibility, we're building SQL wire compatibility, and it will be, Oracle SQL, MySQL SQL, SQL Server SQL, right? It will be, because all we're really doing, we're not changing our core product. We're just adding a layer in front of it to make it compatible. Right.
With the already interface. That's the only way you can make it really consumable, right?
Right. And that's the agnostic thing, right? We talk about these zero trust architectures and stuff, and RBAC, ABAC. Walacor doesn't do that, but what we do is we have architected the product in a way that when we want to integrate with another identity or authentication or zero trust provider or whatever, it's really pretty easy for us to do.
You have a plugin.
We have a plugin mentality, and for us, it's pretty easy because somebody issues a write or a read or something to us. We just go back to the provider and say, should we service this? And it comes back with yes or no, right? And we allow or disallow. So it's pretty easy for us to do.
This is great. Hey, Walter, if people want to find out more about Walacor, Walacor.com?
Walacor.com, WALACOR.com.
Hey, Walter, thanks for coming on the show today. I'm anxious to watch you guys grow and watch how you go through this. We'll be keeping an eye on you guys. I think this is really cool technology.
Well, thanks for having us, and thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and embrace the digital revolution.